Bolton was one of the most important milling towns in the north of England. Over the centuries, it has been home to several waves of immigrants from Belgium and France, Ireland, and more recently, India, Pakistan, and East Africa. Bolton is also a famous film location, with the Mans Crescent featuring many times in movies and TV shows. But there is much more to see here, and this walk features the best places to visit. This grand building dominating Victoria Square is a fitting home for the Borough Council of Bolton. The borough was created only in 1838. Before, the area had comprised of a group of small towns and districts. Each such town had its own town hall. The management of these districts and towns was firmly in the hands of a few wealthy people, and they didn't divulge powers to the working classes. However, as the Industrial Revolution progressed, more people became prosperous and called for local government reform. This came with the incorporation of Bolton Borough. The new Borough Council needed a new home, but it took almost 40 years to build one. An initial budget of £40,000, over £45 million in today's money, was allocated. The designer George Woodhouse was selected by a competition. Woodhouse designed the building in a mixture of styles. The building is a neoclassical style with a Baroque Revival-style tower in a classical temple form. Note the large portico, porch, characterised by the large columns, towers, and a symmetrical layout. Within the decorative pediment is a bright, white, high relief portraying symbolic figures. Along the front of the building is a series of composite columns combining two or more of the classical column forms: Toscana, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The very tall tower, in contrast, is much more decorative, especially nearer the top, ornate with statues. What is also unique about this building today is the peregrine falcons that have nested in the tower since 2008. Bolton Town Hall boasts a council chamber, hall of memories and banqueting hall. As well as this, there are sculptures by W. Calder Marshall R.A., which represent Bolton, manufacture and commerce. The town hall had to be reconstructed in 1981 after damage from a fire. The town hall is currently closed to visitors due to the COVID pandemic. In 2017, a tribute was made in the town hall to the women in Bolton's history with the Brilliant Bolton Women. A total of 11 significant Boltonian women were highlighted with photographs along a corridor of Bolton Town Hall. This included historical women such as the suffragette Elizabeth Ann Anderson, the Egyptologist and philanthropist Annie Barlow, who contributed to the Egyptian exhibitions in Bolton Museum, activist and suffragist Sarah Radish, and Bolton's first female mayor, Helen Wright. More modern women included are the first Muslim woman elected to Bolton Council, Councillor Safrana Bashir Ismail, in 2006, Bolton Council's first female chief executive, Margaret Asquith, in 2016, and many others. The grand bronze statue of Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Alfred Dobson stands next to the Town Hall in Victoria Square. It reflects the importance of his position in Bolton in his time. As an industrialist, he was chair of Dobson and Barlow Limited, founded by his great-uncle Isaac Dobson, a significant manufacturer of machinery used in the textile industry. Dobson wrote several important research works and travelled throughout Europe and the Middle East in his quest for techniques to improve cotton spinning. Dobson was undoubtedly looked up to, as you do now, as you look up at his statue standing atop a polished granite plinth. While the figure here portrays him as an important industrialist who was quite benevolent, this view might be questioned because of his actions during the strikes of 1887. He hired imported blackleg workers to ensure his factories could continue to operate, so he did not lose out financially. He became Mayor of Bolton in 1895 and he maintained the position until he died in 1898. Dobson married quite well. His wife, Coralie Pallin, was a lady of stature and served Bolton as well. She became the first woman to wear the official chain as she became the mayoress of Bolton in 1895. Another special building in Victoria Square is the Exchange Building, which stands on the corner of Newport Street. The Bolton Exchange Company commissioned it in 1826 for £3,000, about £4 million in today's money. The land still belongs to the Earl of Bradford and has been leased for 999 years at the cost of 9 pennies a square yard. Today, 9 pennies is worth 3.75 pence. The Exchange Building was used for commercial meetings and gatherings of business people. Exchange buildings are common all across Britain, but in many cases are dedicated to a specific trade, corn exchange or hop exchange. Given the general nature of this building, meetings held here probably led to decisions that influenced the town, such as the construction of the memorial for Crompton. When the legislation passed that allowed the establishment of public libraries, the council rented rooms on the upper floor of the building, converting them to a library. The library stayed here until 1938, when it moved to the current location at Mans Crescent. The building had other uses over the years as well. When a fire broke out in 1933, the library was vacated for a while, and after the move to the new place, the Inland Revenue used it during World War II. In later years, commercial ventures rented rooms and offices, but today it remains vacant. The building is Georgian in style, with 2 columns on each side of the main entrance. Interestingly, there is a high relief of the Staff of Hermes, which is a modern symbol of logistics. This fantastic machine at the University of Bolton's car park entrance is one great reminder of the steam age heritage embedded in Bolton. The steam hammer is an invention that was conceived by James Watt as early as 1784. The mechanism included a cylinder that, using the force of steam, would raise the hammer. Upon its release, steam would push down, ramming a sheet of metal placed on a die at the hammer's base, thus impressing the shape of the die on the metal sheet. Nasmyth created his first steam hammer in 1842, having founded Nasmyth and Wilson in 1836 in Patricroft. Later he collaborated with James Walmsley and Sons, who manufactured this particular steam hammer and was used between 1917 and 1975. Nasmyth's inspiration for producing such machinery came from his father. James was encouraged by their father, an amateur mechanic, to experiment with forging and working with various metals from an early age. He later went to the Royal High School in Edinburgh. Nasmyth was known to be a very decisive man, and the way he found his wife really demonstrated that fact. The story is told of a journey he once took to York during a snowstorm. During the journey, he noticed some furnaces belonging to his client, Mr. Hartop. He decided to abandon his journey and went through the deep snow to Hartop's house. He was invited to stay the night and meet the family, among which was Mr. Hartop's daughter. He fell in love with her during this stay and immediately told her how he felt. Her response was very encouraging. He asked her father for his approval to be married. After his acceptance, they became engaged, but it took them 2 years to finally get married. This Nasmyth and Wilson steam hammer was donated to Bolton Institute of Technology, Bolton University, and has stood here from 1981 to commemorate Bolton's industrial history. This interesting chapel, with 2 white statues over the main entrance, was built in 1897 as a Roman Catholic church. Today it is part of a Catholic school that you can see on its left. However, almost 200 years ago, the area looked very different. There was an older Catholic chapel, and next to it, in place of the space south of the chapel, stood a workhouse. Nothing remains from that workhouse today, but the map from 1824, shown above, displays the area's layout as it was at the time. Workhouses were established to support vulnerable people and provide shelter for families and individuals who didn't have the means to do that for themselves. Local parishes dealt with the impotent poor by passing several poor laws as early as the 16th century. One of the measures to provide for these needy people was to house them in poor houses. In most cases, these poor houses were small and only provided food and shelter for infirm inmates. Those who were not ill were cared for by outdoor relief, in which they were not admitted to the poorhouse, but received food or money. When the Poor Law of 1834 was passed, it revolutionised the care provided by the workhouses, and funding came from the government. Outdoor support was no longer provided to all the people in need, and instead had to be housed in the workhouse, which also provided education and occupation. Each workhouse was part of a geographical territory called a union. Before the Poor Law of 1834, Bolton already had several poorhouses and workhouses in the borough, as did other towns in the area, most notably in Farnworth and Westhoughton. In 1811, a purpose-built workhouse was built on this site. It provided room for several hundred of inmates, with a clear separation between women, men and children. The area further down the street was the women's yard. Living conditions in the workhouse were harsh. It was done deliberately to ensure that the people had done everything in their power to provide for themselves and used the workhouse only as a last resort. When new inmates arrived, they were stripped, well washed, given fresh clothes, and their old ones in most cases burnt. All their other possessions had to be surrendered for the use of the general population. Men, women and children were separated. 3 basic meals a day were provided. Breakfast and supper were always the same and comprised of oatmeal bread, milk and some form of stew for supper. Lunch differed during the week, but meat was served 5 times a week, which was a luxury for many people outside the workhouse. Able-bodied people were put to work, primarily weaving cotton, for 10 hours a day, apart from Sunday. Children up to the age of 11 received an education. It was very rudimentary, and the teacher of the day was anyone available at the time. The main subjects taught were reading, writing, and religious studies. Some form of numeracy teaching was provided if there was someone who possessed the knowledge. In the late 19th century, a new workhouse was built further south. It was built to replace all the other workhouses in town and had room for over 1,000 inmates. With it, this workhouse was no longer needed and subsequently demolished. The new workhouse became the Royal Bolton Hospital. You can still see some of the old workhouse buildings if you visit the hospital. The current chapel is dedicated as a lady chapel. It is part of the Roman Catholic Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, whose statues you see above the main entrance. The school was built in 1855 for those who follow the Catholic doctrine. In 1920, the chapel was remodelled as a war memorial for those who had fallen in World War I. The fine mosque building is the centre for the Muslim community in Bolton. As of 2011, there are 28 mosques throughout Bolton to serve the Muslim population of 32,500, but this is the largest. However, the Zachariah Masjid was actually established in the building across the car park. The chapel-like building was once the Emmanuel Church and was bought by the Muslim community in 1967. It had served the community well as a religious centre and school. Still, at the beginning of the 20th century, new premises were needed. When planning permission was granted, the sum of over £3 million was gathered to create a modern building with facilities for men and women to pray, study and contemplate. The mosque has 2 main halls for prayers, managed by the imam, and modern technology allowing people who can't attend to listen to the prayers from the comfort of their homes. Children can gather for afternoon study, and the facilities also include a library and a shop to provide for special religious needs. Throughout the COVID pandemic, much was done to allow people to use the mosque while maintaining social distancing and good care for the welfare of the people. The humble building opposite, Zachariah Masjid, is an important stepping stone in the history of the Muslim community in Bolton. When you look at the building from the car park, it is clear from the colour of the bricks that the building was originally smaller and was later extended. Originally, this building was built as a church and consecrated on 28th of June 1839 as Emmanuel Church. The red bricks mark the size of the original building. It was used as a chapel and later a Sunday school for many decades. Changes to the parish boundaries meant that the population attending the school changed. In the 1960s, a new hall was built further down Church Street. This was initially used as a Sunday school, but later as a hall for various activities. At the same time, the nature of the community in this area changed. With the waves of immigration from India and Pakistan, the population's culture changed to include more Muslim people and church attendance dwindled. In 1967, the Muslim community leaders purchased the church to provide them with a place to worship and a centre for the community. They bought the chapel for £2,850, a substantial sum of money when to buy a house in the area was less than £1,000. The community funded it by subscription, which was typically 2 shillings a month. The chapel became the first mosque in Lancashire. Initially, there was no regular imam, and the most knowledgeable person from the community provided that service. After a few years, a dedicated imam was brought from India to serve as the first fully paid imam. His name is Yusuf Matala, and he is still part of the community today. Apart from a mosque, it also served as a madrasa for the community's children, who came after regular school to be taught Arabic, Muslim traditions, and the Quran. Children are taught between 4:45 and 7 p.m. and have yearly exams. Classes were divided by age and gender. The same traditions continue today in the new mosque, built opposite the first school building. The building had to be extended twice to accommodate the growing population and demand, extensions which can be seen today by the brown colour of the bricks. In 1969, the mosque was named Zakaria Mosque after a religious teacher from India. At the beginning of the 20th century, the new mosque was built to serve the community, and the first school building is no longer in use. This fine church-like building is a relatively new addition to this area. It was built in the 1960s, when the old church no longer fit the community's needs. The hall was built as a church, but after the decline in people attending services, the church closed in 1970 and it became a hall. The vicar still wanted to draw the young people to the building and allowed it to become a meeting place for the community for games and lectures. From the 1970s, it was clear that the community was changing, so the vicar made the hall a multicultural institution. It had also served as a youth hostel for young adults who lost their way in life, used drugs, or simply became homeless. Today, unfortunately, the place is fenced off and there is no access to it. Immigration to Bolton included people from different faiths. This temple celebrates the Hindu faith. Sri Swaminarian Temple was opened in 1973 on Adelaide Street, Bolton. This was the first Swaminarian temple not only in the UK but also in Europe. They are also known as Mandirs, which are Hindu temples that follow Swaminarian Hinduism. Founded by Swaminarian, who was a yogi and believed in abstinence from sensual pleasures. He was born at the end of the 18th century and died in 1830. Swaminarian was aged 11 when his parents died, but he was already well versed in Hindu scripts even by then. He started a pilgrimage around India, trying to find an ashram, a Hindu monastery, that could answer his 5 fundamental questions. He found the answers with Ramanand Swami, and he stayed with him until Swami's death. Swaminarian received the leadership of the movement, naming it Swaminarian Sampradaya. His revolutionary philosophies at the time included equal education for all genders and castes, and his objection to the sacrifices of animals and the consumption of meat by Brahmin priests. He wrote several texts to his followers, which formed the basis for this movement. When he died, he had 1.8 million followers, and today there are temples on 4 continents. The community here is predominantly from Gujarat in western India and started with the first Hindu immigrant in 1952. Initially, there were only 5 families that worshipped together. This temple is also known as Sri Kutch Satsang Swaminarian Temple or Sri Swaminarian Mandir. The temple was blessed by an important religious leader, Jivan Pran Sri Mukta Jivan Swami Bappa. Worship began in 1971 when a small number of Hindu residents gathered in a terraced house. The building that was the Sri Swaminarian Temple was demolished in 1992 and rebuilt by 1993 as the previous building was too small. The temple in Dean Road was officially reopened on the 6th of September 1993. It's a medium-sized building with 3 temple-like sculptures over the main entrance. The temple's 40th anniversary was celebrated in 2013 when 2,500 people visited the Swaminarian Temple and held a carnival parade. The facilities of the 3-storey temple include the temple and hall for weddings, Hinduism classes, Balmaldel classes for children, dance classes, yoga classes, sports events, fitness events and youth events. Looking at the simple townhouse at 140 Dean Road, it is hard to see what's significant. However, it is strongly linked with the immigration of people in the 1960s. Bolton is now a thriving town with many different communities. Many of these communities result from immigration around the Commonwealth following the end of World War II. Several waves of people arrived from Europe, starting with the Huguenots. They were Protestants and had to flee France, Belgium and the Netherlands in the 17th and 18th centuries. Most of them settled in the east of England and London, but some ended up here in Bolton. They were followed by Irish immigrants in the 19th century, driven by famine and Young Irelander rebellion in Ireland. Today, very little can be found to commemorate these communities. Those arriving in Bolton after World War II came predominantly from India and Pakistan. The first to arrive in Britain in the late 1950s were professional people. They were educated in their homeland and already spoke English. However, Bolton is an industrial hub, needing many working hands to continue the prosperity bestowed on it by the cotton mills. So subsequent immigration in the 1960s was characterised by labourers. Those from India and Pakistan spoke little English, and the new country's culture was utterly unfamiliar to them. When they arrived in the UK, they typically followed other people that they knew from their villages, so people coming here had expected to find acquaintances they could rely on. Their journey was a simple one. After arriving at Heathrow, they took the first train to Bolton. When they arrived, they went to a place that could accommodate them for the first couple of weeks in England. The first such place was here, at 140 Dean Road. A newcomer would turn up at the door and be provided with food, a bed and a workplace. Some paid for their accommodation, but most didn't have a penny. The weekly wage for a labourer was £5 a week at the time. With the community's help, they found a place to rent, and once settled, they brought their families over as well. Over time, several other welcoming houses like these were established. For many, 140 Dean Road was the start of their new future, a place they will never forget. As you approach the corner of Dean Road and College Way, you'll notice a very modern and beautifully designed curved building with a large front window. Peer inside and you'll see several racing cars on display. Easily mistaken as a dealership showroom, this is the National Centre for Motorsport Engineering, NCME, part of Bolton University. The formation of the university is the last stage in a process that started in 1824. At the time, the industrialists recognised that educating the workers was a vital strategy in preserving Bolton's industry at the forefront of technology, enabling it to compete with America and the continent. In 1824, the Bolton Mechanics Institute was formed to provide some guidance and support to an apprenticeship programme aimed to preserve and train young people with the milling and cotton industry mechanics. Further changes were made in how apprenticeship was provided, leading to the formation in 1891 of Bolton Technical School in Maudsley Street, close to Victoria Square. Demand for the lessons grew rapidly, and the courses also changed to provide certification, some of which were recognised outside Bolton. In 1926, the Bolton Technical School became a college. New courses were introduced for arts and general science, although engineering courses remained the most popular. In 1982, the Bolton Institute of Technology and Bolton College of Education merged to form Bolton Institute of Higher Education, which in 2004 received full university status. Today, it is one of the country's newest universities, with around 11,000 students. The NCME is the only educational institute that trains future engineers for the motorsports industry. Britain is at the forefront of the world's motorsport, and 4 out of the 10 teams that currently race in Formula One are British. NCME keeps very close ties with the motorsport industry, and students participate in events and are offered internships by racing teams. The river that passes next to Queen's Park is one of several which can be seen in and around Bolton. The Crowle is one of the smaller rivers in the region, with a length of about 10 miles. Despite its length, it collects water from several tributaries. It starts just west of the town, near Middlebrook, and flows eastwards towards Bolton, where it is convolted through the town centre. It turns south towards Farnworth, where it flows into the River Irwell, and ultimately to the River Mersey. The river name comes from the Old English words crow and weller, meaning a winding river. Queen's Park opened in 1866 as Bolton Park. Initially it was known as the People's Park, but was renamed Queen's Park in 1887 during the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. It is a large park on a hill slope, providing fantastic views of Bolton from the landscaped top section. William Henderson designed the park, but unemployed cotton workers built it during what was known as the Lancashire Cotton Famine, which was a depression in the cotton industry between 1861 and 1865. They built the park on what had been a meadow bought from the Earl of Bradford as part of the Bolton Improvement Act of 1864. The overall cost was about £90,000, which was worth it to create a public amenity to improve Bolton and employ the unemployed cotton workers. You can meet familiar faces in the park, such as Benjamin Disraeli, John Fielding, and James Dorian, or at least their statues. Benjamin Disraeli was the Prime Minister of Great Britain twice, has stood in Queen's Park since 1897, sculptured by Yorkshireman Thomas Rawcliffe. Benjamin Disraeli visited Bolton several times, most notably in 1840 during his visit to Barrow Bridge. Barrow Bridge became an inspiration for the fictional village Millbank in his book Coningsby. John Fielding, however, was secretary of Bolton Trades Union and self-actor Minders Association. Sculpted by J. William Bowden of Bolton, the statue was unveiled in 1896 by Lord James Hereford. He was the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster at the time. James Dorian's statue was sculpted by John Cassidy, who also created the statue of Dobson, Link 2. This Irish sculptor lived and worked mainly in Bolton and must have felt pride as he sculpted the figure of a fellow Irishman who was a doctor and Justice of the Peace in Bolton. One could have also visited the Chadwick Museum at Queen's Park, but it was demolished in 1957. But luckily you can still visit the Crescent Museum instead. You may wonder why I brought you here to what is an unimpressive industrial street. That is, until you see this little gem. As the sign says, this is Bolton Little Theatre. The theatre is not a new enterprise. It was established in 1931 as a home for an amateur theatre society for Bolton. It has 2 small theatres, one sitting 165 and the other only 60, making the performances very intimate. However, while the amateur company performing here is highly regarded in Britain, its fame comes from its most famous alumni, Sir Ian Mckellen, known for his many acting credits, such as Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings and Magneto from the X-Men films. Sir Ian moved to Bolton at the age of 11. He attended Bolton School, not too far from here. His sister Jean introduced him to the theatre from the age of 3, seeing Shakespeare plays amongst others. Like Sir Ian, Jean had a performing arts career. She acted, produced and directed amateur plays all her life. During and after his years at the Bolton School, he also played in various shows at the Little Bolton Theatre and is still its patron. The Mans Crescent was named in 1974 in honour of Bolton's twin town in the south of France. The twinning agreement was signed between the towns in 1967. While twinning agreements have been custom since the 9th century, the modern interpretation was established after World War II. The aim was to create economic and tourism links between the twin towns. Once an agreement is signed between the towns, it was customary for each town to name a place after the sister town. Mans Crescent is an example of this. The Crescent was built in the 1930s as a civic centre, with the library at the south end and at the north side a magistrates' court and a police station. In the middle are 3 archways leading to Cheadle Square. The police station has since been moved to another location. However, the prison cells that were part of the police station are still used to hold people standing trial. Bolton is also known for its support for the film industry. The Old Mills and Workers' Estate provides a backdrop to many scenes, featuring stories from the 1960s and 70s. Mans Crescent is featured in many films, especially The Magistrates' Court. It also has been the set for some well-known TV series, including Coronation Street, Peaky Blinders, It's a Sin, and Millions, an image from which you can see above. If you want some quiet time, you'll find on Mans Crescent a museum, an art gallery, and a library on its south side. Located on Mans Crescent, behind the town hall, is the Bolton Museum. If you want some quiet time, you'll find on Mans Crescent a museum, an art gallery, and a library on its south side. The museum dates back to 1852 as Bolton's public museum and art gallery. In 1852, Bolton adopted the Libraries and Museums Act and opened its first library then in Victoria Square. Though there was no building for the museum yet, a small collection of fossils was donated to the library. As the collections of scientific specimens grew, by 1876 there were calls for a separate building for the museum. Dr. Samuel Taylor Chadwick left £5,000 in his will to Bolton, specifically for the building, furnishing and maintenance of a museum of natural history in the Bolton Park, now Queen's Park. A museum was created over the next 4 years and had free entry for all. More money was donated to this cause, encouraged by Dr. Chadwick's generous bequest. The first museum building for Bolton was named the Chadwick Museum and opened on 12th of June 1884. There were zoology displays on 3 levels of the Chadwick Museum: the art of stuffing animal skins, rocks and fossils, anthropology, Egyptology, antiquities, and a room of curiosities could all be seen. When the new museum was built, the collections moved here at its current site on Mans Crescent. Alongside the Bolton Museum is a library and an aquarium. The aquarium was opened in 1941, with mainly freshwater fish on display and occasionally reptiles. The aquarium now hosts over 70 varieties of fish from all over the world and usually attracts 100,000 visitors a year. In 2019, one especially important woman in Bolton Museum's history was highlighted: Annie Barlow. A philanthropist and a member of the Egypt Exploration Society, Annie Barlow donated her collections to the museum, specifically the Egyptian collection, which she and her brother helped to form. Her father James, a successful businessman, established the Barlow and Jones Mill Company, which shaped his fortune and helped Annie follow her scientific dreams. James is remembered also as an abolitionist who used his influence to fight and end the slave trade.